A few disclosures before I begin this review. Number one, as with any pre-release review, the review copy was provided by the publisher, in this case, PlayStation. Number two, an audition from a few months ago happened to land me a role in God of War Ragnarok. I play one of the enemies you can kill. It's a relatively small part, and I'm coming into God of War Ragnarok with very little context, so I'm confident in saying that I can give you a fair assessment as someone who's been reviewing games and has been a gamer for many, many years. But still, I felt the disclosure was important so you can make up your own mind about this review. And last but not least, this is a spoiler-free review. There's a lot of stuff that I'd rather just not show you so you can experience it fresh. So much of the game is a spoiler that I had to pick out footage very carefully and edit it in a very specific way. So the footage and the review overall may not be as specific as I want it to be, but I'd much rather preserve the most important story beats and set pieces and moments for everyone. There is one tough optional boss, one out of many, that I do highlight in this review because I wanted to make a point about combat, but I decided to blur out the footage involving that just in case. Some people might deem that, spoilery. That way you get a vague sense of what's going on combat-wise, but the details are kind of blurry and not entirely clear. Hopefully that's a good compromise for that bit. But as far as core main campaign stuff goes, there is nothing here that will spoil you in any way, shape, or form. Alright, so that's that. With that out of the way, please enjoy my review of God of War Ragnarok. To this day, God of War 2018 remains one of my favorite games of all time. It completely reshaped the identity of God of War into something that both embraced the brutality of the past while also maturing and adding a layer of character nuance, development, and relatability that just wasn't there in the original trilogy. Santa Monica took a bold risk with this reboot, and it ended up paying off in spades. I mean, just recently it managed to beat some of the most prolific games to win IGN's Best Game of All Time bracket poll from over 26 million votes. And look, I'm not saying that this poll is the objective truth, but a game has to be pretty special to have that kind of staying power in the hearts and minds of players. But with that comes an even bolder task: make a better sequel. No pressure. It is a task that I do not envy, with expectations for God of War Ragnarok being so sky high. And yet, Santa Monica hunkered down, worked their magic, and managed to deliver a sequel that is in fact better than the original masterpiece, and for the second time in a row, they managed to create one of the best video games ever crafted. Let's get the story out of the way, as this is the topic that I least want to talk about to preserve the experience for everyone. Last we left off, Kratos and Atreus managed to fulfill the arduous task of reaching the highest peak in all the 9 realms to scatter the ashes of their dearly departed Fae, wife and mother to a grieving family, discovering along the way a prophecy foretelling ominous and calamitous events to come. This was a journey that not only tested their prowess and resolve, but also their standing as father and son, a relationship that established a solid foundation by game's end. God of War Ragnarok picks up roughly 3 years after the events of God of War 2018. Signs of an impending cataclysm are apparent at this point, and Kratos and Atreus must prepare for the worst. Immediately noticeable was that this father and son relationship is in a very different place. There's this newfound kinship that was absent at the start of the last game, and yet there's still much room to build upon a still strained relationship that remains the heart and soul in the sequel. Santa Monica once again tackles the growth and development of this relationship with complexity and grace, conveying a nuanced tug-of-war between Kratos' more stoic and conservative nature, a product of the ghosts and monsters of his past, and Atreus' more daring and adventurous nature, a product of, well, just being a teenager who's beginning to discover his own identity and take charge of his own destiny. Atreus is no longer unquestioningly obedient. He has begun to develop his own views and beliefs about their greater purpose in the land of the Nords, a contrast to Kratos' focus on keeping to themselves and prioritizing the safety of his son above all else. Their love for each other is undeniable, but their personalities, habits, and aspirations remain complete opposites, and this not only creates a compelling conflict in a still blossoming relationship, it gives room for them to learn from each other, to try and see each other's viewpoints, to find middle grounds, and watching all of that unfold was genuinely just beautiful and emotionally cathartic. Through it all, I got to watch Atreus grow up and mature, and I got to witness Kratos warm up and become more open-minded. The mutual development of these two characters remains among the most captivating aspects of this narrative journey. To me, this was the part that was most important for Ragnarok to nail narratively, and nail it Santa Monica did. But of course, the world of God of War is bigger than just Kratos and Atreus, and 2018 did leave a number of lingering narrative threads, from the impending titular cataclysmic event known as Ragnarok, to Freya's vow to seek vengeance for her son, and that's just scratching the surface for the sequel. The cast of main and supporting characters in God of War Ragnarok is far more expansive than in 2018, and where Ragnarok could have easily fallen into the trap of an overcrowded story, the game instead managed to deftly weave every character in a compelling way into an ambitious, balanced, and cohesive tapestry, giving pretty much every major character a shining or defining moment, and this includes some of the game's antagonists. There's so much that's covered in this game, and while there are some plot elements and conflicts that I felt they brushed over a bit too quickly, for the most part, I was pleased to find a very comprehensive and compelling story driven by characters with fascinating dimensionality. And the themes, topics, lessons, and cautionary tales that are covered through the characters' choices, actions, and interactions are many. At its core, the story is about finding common ground amidst vast differences, making amends with yourself and others. It's about self-acceptance and learning to trust, about love and its uglier forms like hatred and grief. It's about parenthood and adolescence. It's about what it is to be a family. And on a grander scale, questions are raised about the very nature of war itself, the destruction it can wreak versus the changes in status quo it can pave the road for, and in turn, about the nature of Kratos as a god of war himself. There is so much more I feel tempted to say about the narrative of God of War Ragnarok, but to elaborate further would be to potentially ruin the experience for you, so I'll close on this. All throughout, I smiled, I pondered, I questioned, I feared, I laughed, I gasped, I cried. It was a roller coaster ride of emotions that kept me glued to the game's main campaign from beginning to end. I loved just about every second of it. So much of the effectiveness of God of War Ragnarok's narrative resonance is owed to its astounding presentation. My Aesir's and Vanir's, is this game freaking gorgeous. God of War 2018 still holds up incredibly well, but there is no denying how much more ambitious the visuals are in the sequel. And I'm not just talking about graphics fidelity, which is undeniably better in Ragnarok. While it's not the biggest leap I've ever seen from a pure fidelity standpoint, which is a major credit to how good God of War 2018 still looks, there are certainly more than enough improvements to textures, models, lighting, water effects, particle effects, all kinds of effects, you name it, to easily make this the best God of War has ever looked. Everything's just noticeably sharper looking in Ragnarok, from environmental surfaces to wrinkles and pores on Kratos' ashy skin to the jaw-dropping vistas. More important than the fidelity itself is what God of War Ragnarok does with the graphics, the way they're utilized to bring to life some of the most gorgeous, colorful, and imaginative worlds, environments, characters, creatures, and set pieces on a scale that makes the already epic God of War 2018 look small, and I don't say that lightly. The game's artists really had their work cut out for them, with all 9 realms being accessible in this title, and what they've done here in making each realm feel distinct and gorgeous in its own way and brimming with personality is nothing short of remarkable. I'm confident in saying that this is one of the best looking video games out there right now. It's also one of the most impressive cinematic experiences. If you thought the one-shot cinematography from God of War 2018 was impressive, oh, you just wait until you see how creatively and effectively it is utilized in Ragnarok for its cutscenes and set pieces. It's genuinely some of the most impressive use of one-shot cinematography I've seen in any medium period, woven seamlessly in and out of gameplay to top it all off. I can't begin to imagine how painstaking some of this stuff must have been to plan and implement, but the results are just, chef's kiss. And what gives the presentation that soul and humanity are, of course, the incredible performances across the entire cast of major and supporting characters. If you thought the cast of God of War 2018 were good then, just wait until you witness their work in Ragnarok, and new cast members rise up to the occasion as well. Everyone brought their A-game, but I've gotta say, Christopher Judge, Sonny Suljic, and Danielle Basudi as Kratos, Atreus, and Freya respectively were standouts. And I also have to give honorable mentions to Robert Craighead, Adam J. Harrington, and Alistair Duncan as Brock, Sindri, and Mimir respectively. If these folks, the principal characters in particular, don't win a bunch of awards or at the very least get nominated for a bunch of stuff, then there's just something deeply wrong with this world. The effective use of performance capture also deserves commendation. There's so much that's conveyed through unspoken words, through lingering facial expressions and body language subtleties that express what's between the lines, silence that spoke louder than words could. In the audio department, sound design is on point, proficiently accentuating every cutscene and scenario, intuitively offering players valuable moment-to-moment information, and giving combat in particular that oh-so-important sense of impact. And then there's the music. God of War 2018 has some of my favorite tracks in all of gaming, and with the ever-talented Bear McCreary returning to compose, it should come as no surprise that Ragnarok's soundtrack is a standout, taking familiar and iconic melodies from the first game and giving them new forms of expression, while introducing some welcome new tunes with Nordic inspirations to squeeze every ounce of personality and emotion out of cutscenes, set pieces, and character interactions, and to really round out the tone of this game, which has a wide spectrum of both levity and gravity, all beautifully represented through the array of musical scores. And speaking of levity, something that I was surprised by is how often this game, amidst all the darkness and melancholy, impending doom and all that stuff, made me laugh from start to finish.
Father, is it always moral to kill something that's trying to kill you?
Yes.
Well, there you have it, lad.
The writing team did an excellent job with the dialogue in this game. God of War 2018 had plenty of exchanges to chuckle at, but Ragnarok had me in stitches quite a number of times. And it's not comedy that undercuts the weight of emotional scenes, which are given the respect and room to breathe and tug at your heartstrings. It's not the cringy kind of comedy many games seem to be unable to avoid. It's all very well written and placed appropriately in the moments between, in a way that helps balance out the game's tone. Kratos' stoicism, in particular, is used to incredible comedic effect. This might not make much sense now, but the word no has never made me laugh so much, so consistently, and Kratos being surrounded by, relatively more normal characters like Atreus and wholesome goofballs like Brock, Sindri, Mimir, among others, paved the road to some truly entertaining exchanges and character interactions that made me feel that much more invested in this dysfunctional family, lending the moments of gravity that much more weight, making me care and feel and fear for everyone that much more. Every facet of God of War Ragnarok's presentation is immaculate and meticulously and lovingly crafted. Even better, this game is visual bliss that runs at a buttersmooth frame rate on PlayStation 5. I went with the game's 60 FPS performance mode, and even when things got visually chaotic on screen, I didn't notice a single frame drop. While I'm sure other more qualified outlets will go into a much deeper analysis of the game's performance, as far as what's perceivable, I don't recall encountering a single stutter. And the cherry on top is just how much choice and flexibility the PS5 version of the game gives you. On top of the aforementioned 60 FPS performance mode, you can also pick between a 30 FPS fidelity mode, and if you have an HDMI 2.1 enabled TV, a 40 FPS fidelity mode, and a 120 FPS performance mode. Now, I know one topic of discussion that's cropped up is the cross-gen nature of God of War Ragnarok, and how that might have potentially limited aspects of its design. I'll be honest with you, this is one of those games that's just really good, and I never really found myself thinking too much about the fact that it was cross-gen. I mean, sure, the game does still feature those narrow passageways you shimmy through that in part serve as hidden loading screens, though some developers have come out and said that their primary purpose is actually more about level design to ensure players don't accidentally backtrack and the like. Whatever the case, I don't know how much more would have been possible if this game were made from the ground up for PlayStation 5, but even by current-gen standards, this cross-gen game is one of the most impressive feeling games I've played. It's still a monumental technical and artistic achievement on numerous fronts, and so the cross-gen discussion just sort of stops mattering at that point to me. I just care that this game turned out as good as it did, and the fact that it is on PlayStation 4 and looks so good and runs so well on that console means that more people will be able to enjoy this game during a time when finding PlayStation 5s is still a major struggle. God of War Ragnarok isn't just pure eye candy though, the same level of care was given to the moment-to-moment gameplay. While there's certainly a lot that feels familiar from 2018, there are substantial ways in which Ragnarok expands upon the original. Now, to detail some of the most significant additions to combat would be to spoil key moments and details, so all I'll say is that Santa Monica didn't play it completely safe on this front. There is a lot more here than what marketing or pre-release previews have shown. What I can talk about without revealing too much are recognizable armaments like the Leviathan Axe, the Blades of Chaos, and the Shield, all of which make a return and are at your side from the outset. Having played 2018 shortly before playing Ragnarok, diving back into these weapons felt seamless and like a smooth transition. The Leviathan Axe's heavy swings feel as brutal as ever, and throwing and catching the axe like a boomerang remains incredibly satisfying, further enhanced by the sensation the PS5's DualSense controller provides with its haptic feedback when Kratos catches the hefty axe. The Blades of Chaos remain as agile, swift, destructive, and explosive as I remember them, and the fist-shield combination continue to be effective means to wear enemies down. But they're not identical to God of War 2018. I could feel that tweaks were definitely made to give combat and all of its weapons a greater sense of weight, impact, and ferocity. Combat does still consist of a combination of light and heavy attacks, various skills and abilities unlocked through an expansive skill tree, equipable light and heavy runic special attacks, the Rage mode that's oh so empowering and satisfying to activate, defensive options like dodging, blocking, and parrying, and calling on Atreus to shoot arrows or perform certain combat maneuvers on command. Combat continues to revolve around depleting enemies' HP or building up their stun gauge to deal massive damage or slay them off with brutal finishers whose level of brutality has definitely been elevated.
Jesus Christ.
And yes, some of the attack skills and runic abilities are taken straight from 2018, but there is plenty that's new here as well, be it adjustments or replacements of certain attacks and skills, new additions like being able to charge up your axe and blades with the triangle button to execute powerful new attacks, new equipable items called relics that grant new magical abilities. There are things in the environment that you can use against enemies, and the introduction of vertical combat traversal via a new hookshot ability that allows you to perform meteoric aerial attacks. All of the changes and enhancements felt appropriate, giving Ragnarok's combat an even greater sense of momentum, that sensation of being this unstoppable, constantly moving freight train. Defensively, you'll still have to look at indicators around Kratos that notify impending attacks from off-screen enemies, enemy animations that choreograph their next actions, the yellow circle for attacks that will break your guard but can be parried versus the red circle for attacks that can only be dodged, and new to Ragnarok is a blue circle indicator for attacks that can be negated by executing a shield guard break. Shields have also been expanded upon, now featuring different types that prioritize different defensive options, be it blocking, parrying, shield rushing, you name it, and executing the prioritized defensive maneuver will build up charge that will allow Kratos to perform powerful follow-up abilities. Atreus now has new arrow types like sonic arrows that deal stun damage or hex arrows that cause explosive reactions when paired with elemental damage. All of these tweaks and additions give combat additional layers of engaging complexity and dynamism, culminating in what is arguably one of the most mechanically sound and satisfying combat systems in an action game. It strikes this great balance of having the power fantasy of clearing crowds of enemies akin to the original God of War games, while demanding some of that meticulous mindfulness of, say, FromSoft titles. The latter especially applies in some of the tougher optional encounters featuring those spongy bosses who can kill you with just a handful of hits, where you have to be very precise with your defensive maneuvers while timing your attacks appropriately. If I had some gripes to point out, I'd say that one thing that I don't like is the way there's no sense of impact when you're attacked in the middle of a runic special attack, which will often see Kratos stuck in a long, elaborate animation. During all of that, enemies can at times wail at you and deplete your health very quickly, and visual and audio cues don't provide a sense that Kratos is getting hit or that health is getting rapidly depleted, so I sometimes found myself coming out of runic attacks not realizing how dire my health was looking. I wish there was a bit of an invincibility period at the start of these animations or some way to cancel a runic attack. I know part of the design philosophy is risk versus reward, but it can take away some of the combat precision that the game demands from tougher encounters. Another gripe I'd say is that the required timing for defensive maneuvers like blocking, parrying, and dodging could feel inconsistent on occasions. This wasn't a big deal when fighting weaker enemies or bosses that don't kill you in 1 or 2 hits, but some of the toughest and spongiest enemies, the optional ones in particular, can kill you in 1 or 2 hits, and there were occasions where I timed a block, parry, or dodge just right, I felt, very deliberately pressing the appropriate buttons down, but attacks would hit me anyway at times, and other times they wouldn't. Sometimes it felt like there was invincibility frames, and other times it didn't. There were instances where I had a hard time figuring out why a defensive maneuver worked last time, but not this time, and it made it feel like luck could sometimes play a factor when dealing with the more Soulsborne-y boss encounters where a small mistake can cost you greatly, where it can lead you to swift death. There were also a few times where camera, lock-on, and auto-targeting could impede me when encountering 2 or even 3 really tough enemies at a time. There were a number of deaths that I felt cheated me out of victory because lock-on refused to switch targets no matter how hard I flicked the right analog stick, leaving me blind to incoming attacks. There were occasions where Kratos parried one target and then the follow-up attack auto-targeted another, which left me vulnerable to my intended target's attacks. And there were a handful of instances where strange camera behavior obstructed my ability to gauge incoming attacks. None of these issues ever became severe per se or so prominent as to make combat untenable. This was mainly noticeable in certain really hard bosses that don't give you the luxury of small mistakes. Ultimately though, none of this detracts from the fact that combat is phenomenal when fighting a bunch of weaker, staggerable, and juggleable enemies, which is the most common scenario, when fighting multiple semi-tough enemies that don't kill you in 1 or 2 hits, or when fighting those really tough enemies 1 against 1. It's only once multiple of those really tough enemies get involved that combat mechanics might at times feel like they occasionally don't keep up, but even with these gripes, these really tough encounters are definitely far from impossible and are fulfilling to beat. When victory is earned, it feels well earned indeed. In the grand scheme of things, combat in God of War Ragnarok is incredibly fun, addictive, engaging, intuitive, empowering, and sublime. If you overall loved God of War 2018's combat as much as I did, all you have to know is that Ragnarok's combat is even better and more fleshed out. Similarly familiar yet expanded is the game's progression system. Skill trees feel more streamlined in some ways, but in totality are more expansive in the sequel, with well-paced XP earnings for satisfyingly gradual skill acquisitions. And like before, experience points can be spent to make your equipable runic attacks more powerful, and new to Ragnarok is a sort of prestige system for your unlocked skills. If you use a skill enough times, a mod token slot will be unlocked where you can spend XP to slot in a mod that will enhance attack, defense, stun, elemental damage, or weapon charge buildup for when that skill is used. Also, like before, our favorite dwarves, Brock and Sindri, will offer their services, allowing you to spend money and or crafting resources found throughout the world to upgrade your core armaments and to craft and enhance armor that will all favor different stats for different types of builds, each with their own cosmetic flavors. A few adjustments have been made to the game's equipment system, like armor no longer featuring slots to insert enchantments for passive buffs and bonuses. You now have the separate menu where up to 9 enchantments can be slotted into, with slots gradually unlocking throughout the course of the game, and equipping 3 enchantments of the same set will unlock special perks that grant additional boons. Nothing about progression in this game is radically different from what you might remember in 2018, but the extra layers and extrapolations are definitely there, felt, and welcome. Now, moment-to-moment gameplay, combat, and all this progression wouldn't mean much without fun encounters to use them against, which brings me to one of God of War Ragnarok's most important improvements from 2018, enemy variety. Enemy variety was my biggest gripe with the previous title. Some standout bosses and encounters aside, fighting the same undead forces, creatures, and troll bosses that were introduced near the beginning of the game for so much of the campaign did mar the experience a little back then, with the saving grace being just how fun combat was to make up for the repetitiveness. In Ragnarok, this issue is mostly resolved, especially where boss-type enemy encounters are concerned. And that's excluding the major set-piece main campaign bosses, which, oh man, I can't wait for you all to encounter, and that's all I'll say about that. It honestly felt like the first 5 to 10 hours of Ragnarok alone contained more enemy variety than most of 2018. Sure, some boss types will repeat here and there, but to a reasonable degree rather than to the point of tedium. The game also does a good job of progressively mixing and matching enemy types, which kept me on my toes and forced me to employ strategic combinations of weapons, attacks, skills, abilities, and maneuvers to achieve victory. Now, I will say there were one or two enemy types that were not particularly fun to fight, like these critters here who are more annoying than anything and reoccurred a bit too frequently for my taste, but that's a minor wrinkle that does not overshadow the fact that enemy variety is one feedback that Santa Monica clearly took very seriously, and it goes a long way. Especially with Ragnarok being a longer game than the original, took me a little over 40 hours to beat the main campaign, doing a combination of both main quests and a substantial amount of side quests, and after credits rolled I still had plenty to do, so I expect this to be, for many, a roughly 50 to 60 hour experience. The added enemy variety definitely helps keep the lengthier campaign and the lengthier overall experience fresh, and this was also necessitated by the fact that there are just more varied biomes in Ragnarok. As I mentioned before, all 9 realms are accessible at some point throughout the course of the campaign. Some of these realms will be familiar but repurposed, like the all too recognizable Midgard, which has been transformed into a frozen landscape that can be traversed with a new mode of transportation, a sled dragged by some very, very good boys, or like the previously visited realm of Alfheim, which now takes you to entirely new, never-before-explored areas of that realm. And then there are brand new realms like Svartalheim, the home of the dwarves, or the lush jungles and rich landscapes of Vanaheim, just to name a few, each of which feel wholly distinct from one another and magnificent to behold in their own unique way. There is no one realm that feels half-assed, just kind of thrown in there or like corners were cut. Each one feels fleshed out in some way and are housed within sizable, semi-linear open-world sandboxes filled with epic main quest encounters, spectacles, and set pieces, fleshed out side quests, engaging side activities, puzzles, and collectibles, and more. Remember how expansive God of War 2018's Midgard felt and how much stuff there was to do? Well, imagine multiple realms that are roughly that scale in their size and density of activities. Some realms are definitely bigger than others and are utilized more than others, but not one of them felt like it's wasted space or just shoehorned in. Muspelheim, for example, is still mostly a hub for the Crucible combat challenges, but the location is expanded a bit more in Ragnarok and utilized in other ways as well. Each realm does serve a significant purpose, and each has compelling stories, challenges, and rewards to discover. It's actually really impressive how smartly and steadily the main campaign's grand design weaves you in and out of all of these realms, all while achieving peak levels of splendor, grandeur, and epicness that few video games could hope to achieve. The same goes for side quests and optional areas, which emphasize richness over sheer volume. Hell, I'd argue that some side quests in this game felt like they could be main quest scenarios due to the quality of cutscenes, moments, set pieces, dialogue, and encounters that they present. Even the smaller side quests offer enough interesting lore and entertaining and or introspective dialogue exchanges between characters, or fun encounters, or clever little puzzles or gameplay rewards to give these activities meaning and purpose, making them feel like much more than just tedious filler content or menial tasks. I'm not usually one to be a completionist for open world games, but God of War Ragnarok is one of the few games that actually makes me want to see everything and collect everything. The way one thing leads to the next, the way new areas open up through the campaign's progression and acquisition of new tools and abilities, it's all done with sophistication and paced in a way that just keeps you wanting more. The game is further aided by how much more compelling level design has become. While God of War Ragnarok maintains the same gameplay loop of going from combat encounter to combat encounter with puzzles to solve and treasures to discover and rewards to loot along the way, the levels themselves are also aesthetically brimming with life and oftentimes jaw-dropping to behold. On a larger scale than God of War 2018 at that, combat encounters feature more varied arenas to match the improvements to enemy variety. Environmental puzzles are grander, more clever, and more intricate. Rewards do a good job of making activities feel worthwhile, and all these elements are strung together in a very intuitive way, keeping the gameplay loop consistently interesting and refreshing. There were maybe a few puzzles where the solution felt a bit contrived, where invisible walls on things Kratos could easily traverse through wouldn't allow me to solve puzzles in a way that made more logical sense than the actual directed solution, which can lead to occasional head scratches, but generally, puzzles did feel more involved, more ambitious, and more fun to solve in Ragnarok. The development team clearly had more time to flesh these puzzles out. Traversal has also been expanded with the addition of the hookshot ability that makes it so much swifter to scale cliffs or jump across large gaps, making aspects of navigation and exploration less tedious, more engaging, more fun, though the occasional mandatory slow climbing sections are still there. Not my favorite, but not overly obtrusive either. I do have a few qualms with the amount of time some of the backtracking in this game takes up when revisiting certain areas, particularly for checking off remaining side quests and the like, and there are some level design elements like these exploding poison plants that annoy the hell out of me, and I don't necessarily think the game breaks new mold in open world design per se, but it does what it does well, so freaking well. God of War Ragnarok proves to be a masterclass in its genre. To top it all off, this is also one of the more polished games I've played. A breath of fresh air in an era where publishers have gotten a bit too comfortable with unpolished game launches. There were a few non-game-breaking bugs that I did encounter though, none too egregious to spoil the whole experience. One time, dialogue audio stopped playing for a key cutscene, and since starting from the last checkpoint didn't resolve the issue, I was forced to close out and restart the game to fix this problem, which briefly disrupted the flow of the campaign. Another time, an important bit of dialogue was randomly cut short while walking through the world tree during fast travel, though a restart from last checkpoint did fix this one. There was a single time in which I experienced the game crash, but it was easy to get things back up and running because of the game's generous checkpoints. One of the more disruptive bugs was an instance where a companion character who was supposed to help me solve a puzzle disappeared, and I was stuck for a while not realizing that the puzzle had glitched out, though once I did realize, the issue fixed itself with a restart from last checkpoint. And then finally, one issue that I've had throughout the whole game was markers on the compass going a little crazy from time to time. The compass in this game doesn't just show you the cardinal direction of your destination, but rather it tries to guide you and let you know what direction to face as you're traversing every step of the way to reach your destination. And when it works fine, but there are times the compass gets all confused and it will cause a map marker to jump all over the place as you're moving, making the compass kind of useless in those situations and forcing me to frequently open up the full map to ensure that I was going in the right direction. It's worth noting that Santa Monica did send an email to reviewers stating that they're aware of many of these issues, so it's possible you may not encounter some, many, or any of these few technical issues that I did, but putting those out there as a warning just in case. Now, for some, factors impeding their ability to fully enjoy God of War Ragnarok may have nothing to do with the game, but rather circumstances that may require accessibility features. Fortunately, all of PlayStation's recent first-party releases have featured industry-leading accessibility features, and God of War Ragnarok is no different. I mean, I think I found just about every accessibility feature under the sun here, which deserves special commendation. I, for one, remapped some aspects of the controls and turned on auto pickups, but no doubt there will be many who will make far more extensive use of this feature, and I hope that accessibility features like these will be something that's normalized across major game releases. In case it wasn't clear by now, I freaking loved my time with this game. Surpassing a beloved and acclaimed masterpiece is never an easy endeavor. No doubt there was a lot of pressure at Santa Monica, but they pulled it off, and then some. This is video game craftsmanship at its best and purest, an unforgettable narrative, sensory, and interactive journey, and you owe it to yourself to play this game at some point in your life. Earlier in the year, Elden Ring seemed like the clear Game of the Year winner, but after having played God of War Ragnarok, I must say, Elden Ring does have a worthy contender in its hands. To make a long story short, Santa Monica Studio has delivered yet another magnum opus of a masterpiece.